evening and welcome to the Woman Show. I'm Lenina Rassool. Tonight we're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace. Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Bob Hewitt. What do all of these men have in common? They have all been prosecuted for sexual assault within the context of their workplaces. Now, while all of them have been prosecuted in their personal capacity, what has emerged is that in order for sexual harassment to take place, there are multiple role players who have been complicit in turning a blind eye and refusing to acknowledge accountability within their structures. Tonight on the show, we'll be speaking to Lisa Koopman, a survivor who has taken on her former employers for the sexual harassment that she experienced while she was working there. We also speak to Chriscy Blaaw, an attorney with the Women's Legal Center, who'll tell us and unpack a little bit about what legislation says about sexual harassment in the workplace. But before that, let's take a quick look at some of the high-profile cases that have hit our screens over the past couple of years. #MeToo, a movement started by American activist Tarana Burke in 2006 against sexual harassment and sexual assault. The movement gained global prominence in 2017 when American actress Alyssa Milano sent out a single tweet before bed. If you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write "Me Too" as a reply to this tweet. And global Twitter complied. Milano woke up to hundreds of tweets, and it was just the start. The tweet was sparked by multiple allegations of sexual harassment by Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, who used his professional position and workspace as tools to allegedly assault a number of women. One hashtag led to another, and #TimesUp was born, directly speaking to sexual assault in the workplace. Back home in South Africa, workplace sexual harassment has hit headlines for similar and other reasons. Equal Education, SABC, and the African National Congress are all national institutions that have come under the spotlight for sexual harassment within the past 2 years. In the case of the ANC, it was found that the ruling party did not even have a sexual harassment policy in place. But in December last year, South Africa saw its own #MeToo moment after Lisa Koopman, a former call center employee, took to Facebook to detail her experiences of sexual harassment at her former workplace. The Facebook post went viral, and the company reported firing 17 of its staff as a result. The case is currently in court. But despite all the media coverage, sexual harassment in the workplace remains a controversial issue. While the Labour Relations Act sets out guidelines for what constitutes sexual harassment, the lines are blurry, and women's rights activists and academics argue that there are still too many gaps for it to be effective. A culture of patriarchy and stereotypical gender norms also play a role in the perception of what constitutes sexual harassment. The ANC's draft sexual harassment policy is a case in point, with what gender activists call a problematic Section 18 that outlines behaviors that would not constitute sexual harassment. Behaviors such as compliments, flirtatious banter, forms of greetings that are acceptable to organizational culture, and jokes not intended to be harmful. According to the Labour Relations Act, sexual harassment is defined as unwanted conduct of a sexual nature and may be physical, verbal, or non-verbal, for example, sending text messages of a sexual nature. For more information and more examples of what constitutes sexual harassment in the workplace, visit labour.gov.za. Welcome back. You're watching The Woman Show, and tonight we are speaking about sexual harassment in the workplace. And joining us is Lisa Koopman, who is a survivor and has recently taken on her former company for the sexual harassment that she experienced while she's working there. And we also have Chriscy Blaaw, who is an attorney and heads up the Women in Work program at the Women's Legal Center. Welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining us. So Lisa, I'm going to start with you just for some context. I wanted to get sort of a short summary, if it's possible, about your experience working at the call center, I think it was, yes. And sort of some of the experiences of sexual harassment, and what led you eventually to saying, this is not right, this is enough.
Okay. Well, I started working at Digi Outbound in October 2017. Once I started, I was very excited, you know, to earn more money and, you know, better my life and stuff for my family, support them as well. When we started, I noticed, the energy, something was off. I'm already starting to shake just thinking about it. But if I recall correctly, when we started with training, we were in training for a month. I also noticed that the men far outnumbered the women. I often say, like, if I use a ratio, I would say 70 to 30. They far outnumbered us. And they sort of had this boy club thing going, where they would gang up against the women in the company. I don't want to blame these men alone. I blame the company because in training, from day one, they told us that as a this is word for word what they told us, as a company, we encourage banter. It was my first time hearing that. And when I searched what banter actually means, it says banter is the playful and friendly exchange of teasing remarks. Because it was a sales environment, we worked 24 hours, but we work shifts. They said that banter is good for the business because it keeps everyone going, you know, light spirit, keeps the blood pumping. But I soon realized that it wasn't light teasing remarks. It turned into bullying, where we as women were every day. They teased us, they made fun of us for the way we look, our personal appearances, our hair texture, our weight, our body structure. They would personally attack us on everything that we are, our personal lives, marriages, everything that they can find out about you. They will tease you on it. It started to bother me because, of course, I was hurt by what they were saying to me, but I started to notice that other women were also being affected by it, and not everybody stands up and says, you know, just like stop, like this is hurting us, stop. And I every single day or within my shift week, I probably have 1 or 2 meetings with team leaders, with floor managers, with HR, constantly saying that we are here at work to work. We are nothing but colleagues. Respect me. That's all I ever said in every single meeting. Just respect us and leave us alone. We're supposed to encourage each other to do better, you know. What I noticed is they started turning on me, the entire company, because I was trying to change the culture at the company. I was told directly by my manager, and I quote, there's been a culture here at DG all the years now. New people want to come in and change it. I'm sorry, it's not going to work. It went on for about 16 months while I was there, until I reached a point and I decided there's no amount of money in this world that's worth me going through this every single day. Nobody's helping me. HR, floor managers, those who say, you know, if you have any problems, come to us, we will help you. None of them helped us. Instead, they told us, stop complaining. If you want to move up in the business, you must stop complaining. They made us as women the problem instead of addressing the real issue. It got so bad for me that I started fearing my physical safety, because every time these men would find out that I went to report another incident, because I constantly went, I never stopped, it it's almost like it's a sick mind game. But I would go report. They watch me constantly, and for some reason they would find out everything. And once we or however many other women go forward to report the matters, then they would turn up the heat a little more, try and silence us, try and fill us with fear. It reached a point where I was literally, when my shift ended, I'd have my keys ready, you know, run from the door to my car and pray all the way home, down the N1, please, Lord, just get me home safely, because I don't know if these men are going to come after me to try and, I don't know what. But they hated me for the change I was trying to bring for myself and all the women in the company as well. A lot of women, most of us actually, have been forced to, just to help us cope with the anxiety and panic attacks. We're all under doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, taking medication just to go to work, just to help us cope with what's going on at work. Not only sexual harassment and bullying and body shaming, and we had to deal with sexual assault as well, where the men from DG Outbound would come and press their penises against us, and everything was a big joke. They would do it, know that they are, you know, we don't like it, we are upset about it, and then they would laugh and they would high-five each other. Everything is a big joke to them. They would laugh at our tears. If we're sitting in a meeting crying, they would laugh. I myself, I remember one day pulling out my car from the basement, and one of the guys from the company, he saw me from a distance and he had this look on his face, but my window was open. So I'm reversing, and he comes and he leans his whole body, half of his body in the car, and he slides his hand right up my thigh. And he looks at me and he laughs. Everything is a joke. And I stopped him, you know, right in time. And then I just reversed and I drove away. Every single day I was living my life in panic and fear. I remember driving to work, on my way in, praying to God every single day, Lord, please just protect me, protect us. Let today just be a peaceful day. I don't have energy to fight this today. I just want to come and do my work and leave. But that was never the case.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then you left eventually.
I left on the 18th of January, 2019. As I said, I realized that day I lost my voice. I think I lost my respect from anybody, because they just saw me as a joke. Oh, here's Lisa again, you know, complaining. It's almost like HR and all management, I don't know if they had a meeting to discuss me. They probably did, because that's how they deal with everybody. To say, just ignore her, you know, she's one of those, they would say, rotten apples or something in the business. I was labeled as the rotten apple and the troublemaker. Because I'm constantly complaining, but they don't listen to what I'm saying. They just see me complaining and in a state all the time, but listen to what I'm saying and help me. But on the day that I resigned, I remember calling my parents just to tell them, and I phoned and I said, Mommy, I can't anymore. I can't. No amount of money in the world is worth what we are going through here. I also ran to save my mental sanity, because I was losing my mind. These people started to make me feel like I'm the issue. I started to question myself. If everybody's the same, maybe I'm the issue. I told my mother on the phone that day, if I must be here one more week, I don't know if I'm going to be alive. So I ran to save my life. I ran as far as the Eastern Cape. I went to my family in Port Elizabeth because I was terrified of running into anybody from the company, from Digi, because I know a lot of people come and they go and then they find work at new companies. I didn't want to face any one of them ever again. I was scared the cycle is going to repeat, so I ran as far as possible.
Lisa, I just want to bring Chrissy in here, if I may. So we've heard about some of the experiences that could go on in the workplace that came across as both sexual harassment and sexual assault. So Chrissy, I wanted to just ask from a legal point of view what actually constitutes sexual harassment and sexual assault, and I think that there's often confusion is what drives the silence because we're not sure what's happening. Especially if, like you're saying, someone presses their penis up against you and then they laugh about it and it comes across as a joke. And that also is sexual harassment, also criminal.
Okay, so I think Lisa painted quite a horrific picture of what happens in our society. And I think the starting point, as she mentioned so well, is that we still live in a deeply patriarchal rooted society, and it stems from home spaces into workspaces where women work in conditions that are deplorable but are made to feel like they're crazy when they speak up about it. And I think what you're asking is important because so many women don't know how to address it because you don't actually know if this is sexual harassment or not, and if this is, where do I go? Do I go to SAP? Do I go to my employer? What do I do? So just to start, sexual harassment within a South African context finds itself within the workplace. And with that, you have your labor laws, such as your Labor Relations Act, your Employment Equity Act, which are laws which speaks to and tries to address the imbalance within the workplace. So the imbalance of power, the imbalance obviously that an employer has over an employee, and those laws do have specific provisions which states, for example, that an employer has an obligation to create a safe working environment. And when we hear that, we think, oh, it means that if there's a ladder, it needs to be removed, or, you know, if there's water on the floor, it needs to be cleaned up so I don't fall. But that safe working environment speaks to these conditions as well. And the Labor Relations Act, so does the Employment Equity, they also specifically speak to sexual harassment. And creating a safe working environment is both positive and negative action. So you have to take positive steps to prevent a space where sexual harassment is able to fester. And in your case, the employer specifically allowed for it, and as you're saying, it seems like they promoted it as well. So that's the first starting point. The second point is that our sexual harassment guidelines is within a code, right? Yes. So that's the guideline on the practice and the good handling of sexual harassment. And that code specifically sets out the definition for sexual harassment. And what that definition is unwanted conduct of a sexual nature, which constitutes your ability, your equity. It creates a barrier for you to have equity within the workplace. So that's the definition. And the important elements to pick up from that is that it's unwanted. And that's important because regardless of whether you doubt yourself, if it's unwanted, that's the first element, it's conduct of a sexual nature. And that's also important, right? And that the definition can play itself out in three ways: physical, verbal, non-verbal. The physical is the touch that you experienced. It's anything of a physical nature that's unwanted by another employee or employer and is of a sexual nature. The verbal one is, like you were saying, talking about your body, making comments. Like if I'm wearing a skirt today, I don't want to hear that my legs look nice, or I don't want to hear that my legs don't look nice. So that's verbal, it's of a sexual nature, it's unwanted. Non-verbal could include things like sending, and we live in this day and age of technology. So we send memes, we send pictures on WhatsApp, we send each other emails. And those lines are often blurred within a workplace because you think you're sending me a funny joke, but it's of a sexual nature and it's unwanted from my side. And so that's the non-verbal. So that's the definition, and those are the elements of the definition and the way it plays out within a workspace. And there are very important themes that have come out in relation to sexual harassment, because one of the important things that is really important for women to know who experience this is that the perpetrator's intention doesn't matter. So oftentimes you'll find a man saying, I didn't know this was sexual harassment, or it wasn't sexual harassment from my side. I was being funny. It was banter. That doesn't matter. It's how I received it and how it constituted a barrier to my equity and dignity within the workplace.
That's very interesting. Thank you. That was a very, very good sort of definition. I also wanted to ask about the prevalence. So you spoke about sort of the culture of patriarchy. As the Women's Legal Center, you deal with a lot of women who are experiencing issues in the workplace and other spaces. Do you get lots of queries and cases of sexual harassment? And in your personal research as heading up Women in Work program, do the sort of, and I don't know the research or any statistics speak to the prevalence or how widespread this is?
So at the Women's Legal Center, we are an African feminist strategic law center. So we only assist women, persons who identify as women. And we do that because of this patriarchal society we still live in. We've come so far in our democratic era, but we still find women are still on the back foot of of access to rights, access to justice. And why that is because the positions that women find themselves in. So within the work program, which I manage at the Women's Legal Center, this is a prevalent issue. And what's so crucial about it is how women find themselves in more precarious positions than others, because no one woman is the same. And so what impacts sexual harassment is women have intersectionalities. We may all three be women around the table, but we may come from different racial backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and that places us in very different vulnerabilities even within the same workspace. So for example, I come across domestic workers who experience sexual harassment, but it's more difficult for that domestic worker to speak out because she's the only domestic worker within the home. The home is her workplace. And if she's speaking out against her employer. So you'll find stories of women who says the employer comes and walks around in his underpants, gives her the pants to iron, and he stands and watches her. So that's sexual harassment, but she's not, one, going to report him, because who does she report him to? He's the employer that she's supposed to report to. But secondly, if she reports, she's going to lose her job. She won't, and that's the socioeconomic background. Those are the intersectionalities that come into play, because the vulnerability of her reporting versus myself reporting when I'm in a company and I can do it anonymously, you know, it's very different. So that's the first thing. We find sexual harassment play out throughout private companies, NGOs, small, large, corporate, business, finance, within government. We see this across. And there are a lot of statistics around this, even just within the legal profession. You'll also find that stats show that the transformation of women within the workplace still has a long way to go. And I mean, you said 70 to 30 ratio earlier. That's what you find in a lot of workspaces, is still that it's male dominant. And that directly influences how women are treated, how women's issues are perceived to be real or not, and how they are actually treated either with sensitivity or a lack of sensitivity.
And even who's at the top.
Who's at the top?
Even if you have
who do I report
quite
to?
a lot of female staff.
Yeah. And just to go back to something you asked earlier about sexual harassment and sexual assault, and just where they lie. So sexual harassment falls within the workplace and falls within a labor context. Okay. But sexual harassment can also fall within other spaces of the law. So the first thing to know is that a woman doesn't just have one avenue and that's the only avenue she must take. So if this happened at work, I can only go to my employer. If it was rape, it was rape. That rape doesn't change its name because it happened at the workplace. Rape is an assault, it's a sexual assault, and it has a definition, but if it happens at the workplace, it happened at the workplace. So that's the difference of whether it's just then within the criminal procedure or within a labor context as well. So if there's a sexual assault that happens at work within a work context, or for example, something that people don't know is I can be traveling for work, and it doesn't happen within my work office, so it doesn't just have to happen on the premises, on the property, within the parking. This can happen at a staff party at a different event. This can happen if I travel, if I happen to travel for work and I'm traveling with colleagues and it happens at a hotel in a different country or a different province. That's still within, because I would not be there but for my employment. So that's the labor link. And so a woman has different recourses in that sense. So you're able to lodge a complaint with the employer because you want to address the sexual harassment within the employment space, and or because you don't want this to happen to someone else, because that's also a big issue within the workplace, is that a lot of times we take up issues but they remain anonymous, they remain confidential, and so no one else knows about it. And so what's quite dangerous is that an employer is able to create a harmful working environment because they don't expose perpetrators. They conceal the identity of perpetrators. They tend to close that off. And so you'll find someone being moved from one branch to the next. But they're able to conduct the same type of conduct at that branch, right? So it's that type of environment, one within the employment space. But then you are also independently allowed to lay a charge at the South African Police Service, because that's who deals with the sexual assault and the sexual offences, right? So you're not stopped from doing one or either or. And your employer can't tell you that you can't go lay a charge of rape or sexual assault because we're dealing with this at work. You have the ability to seek the labour recourse and the criminal recourse. And just one other example of where you could find sexual harassment come into play in terms of a different piece of legislation is the Protection from Harassment Act. So for example, the Protection from Harassment Act is where I'm able to get a protection order against someone who I don't have a domestic relationship with. So this could be a neighbor, a friend, somebody I met, you know, in a different area at work or whatever. And what that provides for is to get a protection order against someone to interdict them, to stop them from doing certain things to you. So it could be financial abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. So that's also another area that it could play out. So for example, if you have someone in a workplace who continuously sends you messages of a sexual nature or memes, and you've asked them to stop and they continue to do so, you can lodge a complaint of sexual harassment, but you can also get a protection order against them to stop them from doing certain things. So sexual harassment in the workplace, in the labor context, finds itself within our labor laws, within our labor processes, and within the workplace. But yeah.
Thank you, Chrissy. We have to take a short break. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. You're watching The Women Show. We're speaking about sexual harassment in the workplace, and with us is Lisa Koopman, who is a survivor and who has taken her previous employers to court for sexual harassment, and Chriscy Blaaw from the Women's Legal Center. She's an attorney and she heads up the Women in Work program. And so just coming back into the conversation, I want to move into the space, sort of what I call the post-reporting space, which Chrissy, you mentioned actually that when it's sort of done internally, that it remains a sort of silent space, you know, it's settled and it's moved on. And I just wanted to sort of put out there, we were speaking about the Protection from Harassment Act, which is, I often find very interesting, because I've been told that when women are experiencing violence from people that they know and interact with, we have found with survivors that often they don't even want to put anyone in jail. They don't want to go through that process. They just want the violence to stop. So that is actually a really good way to be serious about something, and to get it to stop, and to, which is sad that I have to say, start creating a paper trail also, which is necessary, and which is what I do want to speak about. You know, it's our conviction rate for rape and sexual assault is no secret. It's very low in South Africa. Across the world, we know that the way that we prosecute sexual assault and rape cases is very problematic, and that the onus is often, they say, on the state, but on the victim to prove that something had occurred. So I wanted to first just clarify, or first, Lisa, let's hear. So you left in January 2019, and you had already made multiple reports to HR at that point, and you say that nothing was resolved. You were told to get over it. You were seen as the rotten apple. What has been the journey for you since you left, in terms of taking action against the sexual harassment? through which processes?
If I can also share what I went through emotionally, it was the darkest time of my life. Not only was I so broken, they got me to a point, like I said, where they try and break you mentally. They try and make it as if you are the issue. So I doubted everything about myself. I still remember when I resigned as well, my mother called the company in anger, you know, to say, why must my child go through this? Why must my child come home crying every day? And what is going on there? And the company told my mother, you know, that they just spoke to me about emotional intelligence, putting it on me again. So I was going through a lot, questioning everything in my mind. Then also not having money, not being able to pay my bills, the rest of the family going down as well, to the point where we almost lost our cars, the house. My father went to met with an agent, you know, to find out what we can do just to survive, just because of my trauma that I went through. I was not able to step back into a corporate space. I remember a few months after resigning, I was forced to look for work, even though I was far from ready. Far from ready. I needed a lot of time to heal. Found a job, but again, as women, we were outnumbered. And based off everything I was still struggling with, I was there for about 2-3 days and I left. I had panic attacks because I was terrified. I was like, am I going to have to go through that again? I can't. So I left, and I couldn't even tell them why I'm leaving. I lost my voice. I lost everything. My family supported me. They helping me also fight this battle legally. The company then trying to blame it on certain individuals. You know, through investigation, saying, okay, but that's the bad guy, and that's the bad guy, and that's, you know, we didn't do anything wrong, and we fired, you know, the perpetrators. We fired them, they're gone. Everything is fine. It's a healthy environment again. But they miss my argument in that it's not only just those guys that you dismissed. There's so many more that still remain at the company, which is why I say it's a culture. It's not those individuals, it's the culture at the company that you encouraged, that you caused on us as women.
So can I just, what you're saying is very interesting, because in numerous books that have come out, we know that the hashtag #MeToo and hashtag Time's Up movement was sort of sparked by Harvey Weinstein. There are other examples. There was Bill Cosby. These are the big ones. Bob Hewitt locally. But what emerged out of all of them was that there were countless other actors who were complicit in keeping this sort of in-house, in covering it up, in not addressing it, looking the other way. And we know a lot more of these stories are coming out. So, Chrissy, I just wanted to come back and ask you about the legislation again, because I was looking through it and I see that there was a code, and there was one word that bothered me about it. It said that employers need to give consideration. So it didn't seem very firm to me. It seemed like sort of an option. We also know that recently in sort of local workspaces, that sexual harassment policies, not everybody has them. There seems to be a very responsive attitude towards it. So often an issue will arise and they'll realize that they don't have a policy, or the policy is not good enough, and everybody scrambles around. And then the others who do have them, implementation is a problem. So I wanted to find out, according to legislation, must they have a sexual harassment policy? Is that what Is that what the law says? If they don't have a sexual harassment policy, is that contravening any legislation? And where does the accountability lie?
Okay, so the code is a guideline, right, on sexual harassment. And it's a guideline that was created through our labor laws and our Labor Relations Act and processes. The amended code speaks to how employers should take positive steps to address sexual harassment, which include having a sexual harassment policy. So it gives that as the most appropriate example, so to speak, for having one. Now, two things that you've mentioned was where companies do have sexual harassment policies, you'll find that it's wholly inadequate, in that it doesn't speak to a reality of a survivor's experience, or the implementation thereof is horrific. Because what you find is that an employer treats a case of sexual harassment as if it's any other work misconduct. And that's a bit problematic, because for how it plays out, whether it's in terms of the policy, in terms of just labor laws, how it plays out is that, so for example, if all of us are in the same workspace and there's a rule that you're not allowed to come to work under the influence of alcohol, right? So now we all come to work, we're sitting around the table and we can smell Lisa's heavily intoxicated and she doesn't act appropriate. And so we're going to report this to the manager. The manager treats it as gross misconduct, the employer disciplines her, and we maybe are called in as witnesses. That's exactly how sexual harassment is dealt with. And that's a bit problematic, because what happens is the employer treats it as a misconduct towards the employer. But that misconduct would not have happened but for the experience that I went through. And so what women find themselves are that they're merely reduced to witnesses within that disciplinary process. So that's the starting point. And that's some of the issues that the Women's Legal Center takes up specifically when dealing with sexual harassment, is that there is no victim-centered approach.
Yes.
Because surely any process that goes around sexual harassment should be surrounded by the victim and her response to it. Like you said earlier, there are women who come to me and say, I don't want to report this. My family doesn't know that this happened to me. And if my family finds out that this has happened to me, they'll take it into their own hands, or I'll lose my partner. So I don't want to report this at all. And you have to respect that woman's autonomy and her choice not to do so. There are spaces where the employer would want to mediate this, and I don't want to sit across the table from my perpetrator and talk about this, right? So it's that lack of a victim-centered and a feminist approach to this type of issue, one. And then just accountability. So an employer is supposed to have a sexual harassment policy, and where they do have, we also find that people don't know about it. The first time you see the sexual harassment policy is when you come and sit with HR and say that this has happened, right? So you don't have input to that sexual harassment policy, there's no consultation around it, and it's something that employers take from one another or copy from other organizations just to have this basic checklist. So that's what this policy is used as a checklist of, we've got a policy, we're going to do something in terms of the policy. The second point is that our law actually places a positive duty on employers to act reasonably in cases of sexual harassment. So exactly what Lisa was saying about, but the perpetrators are dismissed, so we're fine. What our law, Section 60 of our Employment Equity Act, specifically says that employers have to take reasonable action to act when there are complaints of misconduct in the workplace, right? And what has played out not only through that piece of law, but also through our case law around sexual harassment, which has been great, is that even our courts have found that where an employer does not act reasonably, when a case of sexual harassment and a complaint has been brought to them, that employer then is vicariously liable and is deemed to have contravened the act. So in a space where I've sat in numerous meetings, I've made complaints to HR managers, to team leaders, they laugh it off, nobody's taken it serious. That employer, so even though I'm the director in the company, I can't move away and say, oh, I didn't know this, the team leader is dismissed. There's that accountability that our law places on the employer, because a workplace is such an imbalanced space. Our employers have so much power over us, and it's this imbalance of needing to work, needing the employment, needing the income. And so I go through so much within the workplace, and the employer having that hold within my environment, but they also have so many obligations and responsibilities towards my environment. So employers cannot escape liability and accountability by merely saying, that we've dismissed them. You know, we've made an investigation and it was this one person and we've dismissed that person, so the environment is now cured, when there have been so many complaints about the environment itself and perpetrators within the environment.
Thank you.
Can I just add something to that? While you were talking, it reminded me of one of the many days when I went in to complain about it. I was standing inside of HR's office, and I don't know if they had a policy on sexual harassment. I don't know what, if she got it from Google or I don't know where she got it. And then we were told that they're going to email it to our team leaders and management. You know, as the company, they didn't come forward and address it themselves. They sent out emails, and when we were called into the meeting regarding sexual harassment, one of the perpetrators, he printed out the documents, and he's like, come, we must now go discuss the sexual harassment. And then while we're walking in as women, then he said, yeah, you complain, but you like it. And he read it off like, you know, like everything is a joke, and then throwing up the paper and throwing it away. So what more could we do as women but leave, because nobody's helping us?
So Lisa, you eventually went to Facebook, and I just wanted to know what led you to taking that drastic action, taking it public. You said that they had called you in for a witness, as a witness in a different case. And that women were still phoning you.
Yes.
So you knew that this issue was ongoing.
Yes.
And you knew that this issue had not been resolved.
Yes.
And in which month was it that you posted?
In December.
Okay.
I just reached a point where I was like, I'm receiving too many messages from the inside. Too many women phoning me saying nothing has changed, you know. I'm still being sexually harassed. Nothing has changed. The company's lying, basically. And I just reached a point where I said, I'm not going to protect this story anymore. Or people need to know what is happening. The truth needs to come out. Because what I've noticed is the company tries to silence the situation, because they know, I mean, with so many of us women that have been through the same thing, with all our doctor's notes, all our medical notes, everything, they know how much trouble they can be in. So, which comes back to the settlement, which came with a gag order. So they try and
contain it.
And I just, and also, I let them know that I'm about to speak out. I'm going to report this. And they tried to stop me. They said, if I, you know, dare defame the company or anyone at the company, they will sue me and hold me responsible for everything. And I responded and I said, you do what you need to do, but I need to do this. Too many women are suffering. So I posted it. And you know, it happened in December. It's almost a year since I resigned. When I pressed post, when I sent it, it felt like the first time I could breathe for that year. Honestly, the truth is out. People know.
And so, Chrissy, so that's also, for me, interesting. We know that actually, with Harvey Weinstein, again, to bring him in, the gag orders turned out to be his downfall, because that was a way to sort of track back how long this had been going on. Do you see that happening in South Africa? Does it happen? There's a settlement, and then there's a gag order, because we know that they're trying to contain it. They're trying not to defame the company. And the other thing I just wanted to ask, in the few minutes we have left, is just to backtrack again to sort of the process. Now, Lisa, you spoke about going into HR and reporting it. I'm a big fan of put it in writing, right, so that there is sort of a record. Is that something that you suggest, and how can women make sure that they, and men, really anybody who is experiencing harassment or sexual harassment in the workplace, what are steps they can take to document it? Because there is still a series of steps that they have to go through. There are the guidelines that people need to follow, and so to do it properly, we need to document that we've also taken these steps.
Yeah. So a few things. We would also like to always motivate or recommend to people to keep a detailed track of notes of what has happened, just so that you are able to recall dates, recall events, recall places, right? Because unfortunately, this incident still finds itself within our law. And our law, it plays itself out in a neutral way. So it plays itself out in a 1 + 1 = 2. And that's not always the case, right? So keep notes of what has happened. If you're able to share it with someone you trust, do that. So that there's someone who's able to come and testify for you, but that's difficult within a workplace because I can't testify for you and put my own employment at risk. So that's what we find plays out. But something I actually want to touch on that Lisa mentioned was this, either the perpetrators suing the employer then for unfair dismissal or for being targeted unfairly, or a very harsh reality that we're finding within a labor context is perpetrators resigning. So because this finds itself within the workplace, once you resign, I can't hold you accountable anywhere else. So if it's not, for example, if it doesn't fall within the sexual offense where I am able to go the criminal route, if this is something that happened within the workplace and it falls within sexual harassment within the workplace, once you resign, there's no longer that employment obligation. And so that's a big problem we're seeing because employers are then saying, we can't hold him accountable, he's resigned, he's left, he doesn't work for us anymore. So that's a big problem. And so other issues touches on this feminist approach that we want to start seeing around sexual harassment, because it will then influence the way complaints are dealt with, survivors are dealt with in the process. But what we find out and what we must remember is that worldwide, also the Me Too and Rise Up, it's not that old. It's not that old, it's like a year or two old, really. So we still have spaces where women are still afraid to speak up. We're still in an era where women don't want to take the recourse. They don't want to jeopardize their employment conditions, their working environment. And what we found over the past year specifically come to the fore greatly is this issue of defamation. Now, you mentioned something very interesting earlier, and this is the notion that we know what our criminal justice system looks like. We know what conviction rates look like in South Africa. We know the hassle of having to go for a protection order, spending the day in court, being in a justice system that's not always friendly, having to approach a clerk maybe that's in a mood and doesn't treat you well, and you're there and for something, taking days off work for a complaint against work. So all of those things, we know what that process looks like, and it's tiring, and some women don't want to go through that process at all, right? So this is the reality of what we deal with. And because of that reality, so this is why I'm saying there's this context, because of that reality, many women have taken to social media. There's the hashtags on Facebook, Twitter, and it's where I'm able to then say, this is what happened to me, this is my perpetrator, and 10, 20, 50 other women coming out, speaking out about the same thing, right? What we found over the past year, specifically even within our organization, and over the past 2 years, is perpetrators coming after the woman for defamation. So they're saying, you're defaming me, you're defaming my character, I'm losing employment, funding, networking opportunities because of this. And so because of that, you need to stop what you're doing. And so they're coming to court to interdict women, to basically gag women from speaking up about this. And this is a very important issue we've even taken up as the Women's Legal Center to truly look at, because this is how we have to think about what is a feminist approach, what is a feminist approach outside of the law and using the law, because what other recourse do women have when you try to go to HR and they're the ones who shoot you down, when you try to go to the justice system and you get secondary victimization there.
Okay, Chrissy and Lisa, that's all the time we have. I think we could go on forever. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back after this. That's all we have for this evening. To recap on a few points, make sure that you keep a record of all of the incidences that you experience so that you can track back to it. And also, there's legislation in place that can help you to counter sexual harassment in the workplace. I'm Lenina Rassool. You're watching The Women Show. Good night.